everyone. Welcome to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast, where we explore our shared love for watching and discussing movies recorded in the late after-work hours, often in lieu of a good night's rest. I'm Madeline.
I'm Emilio.
And I'm Julian. The three of us are colleagues at a Midtown Manhattan music school. Yes, music is what brings us together, but movies are what keep us together, talking at the end of the night. So we've created some order to this ongoing trend by recording these conversations, considering an overarching theme while we cycle through 5 unique guidelines for engagement.
You can email us at sleeplesscinematicpod@gmail.com. Seriously, we would love to hear from you. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok for updates, highlights, clips, and other visual supplements to the audio that we record at Sleepless Cinematic Pod.
In addition to these main episodes, we record and release bonus one-off episodes as we see fit. While we do this, you, the listener, can count on the three of us doing what we've grown to love, foregoing sleep for a discussion about movies every other week.
This week, we continue our current cycle of movies related to musicians on film with a category we call Two Shot, where we focus on 2 movies with some striking commonalities, some obvious, some not so obvious, and discuss their themes, characters, and other salient details that stood out to us. And guys, what 2 movies are we going to be discussing today?
You know what? Before we do that, I just want to ask, is that the first time you've said the word salient on this podcast?
Yes, and I was so excited that I got to say it first before Julian got his end. So thank you for putting that in the intro.
I'm just glad that my word is out and a little more in the ether now.
I think it is too.
You still get one use for this episode. Mine does not overtake yours.
I sent you a synonym, right?
You did send me a synonym.
Do you remember what it was? Because I don't.
It was conspicuous.
There we go.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Back on the subject of what we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about 2 films. I guess I'll start with the first one we'll talk about, which is a documentary that was released in 1967. It's called Don't Look Back. It's directed by D.A. Pennebaker, and it is all about the subject that is also covered in the second film that we're talking about.
Yes, and we shouldn't wait any longer to say who that subject is. That is the inimitable, or in the case of one of these films, quite imitable
Very true.
figure, Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
One of the most iconic musicians of the 20th century and beyond. I'm sure we'll get deep into the status of his myth, his legend, as we go through this conversation. The second film that we're going to discuss that is about him today is the film I'm Not There, the 2007 film directed by Todd Haynes, in which 6 different actors portray some version of Bob Dylan. Surrealistically and to, I think, quite brilliant effect. Yeah. It's worth highlighting these 2 movies, not simply because they're 2 films about Bob Dylan, but because they are 2 of quite a few films about Bob Dylan that are out there.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't actually realize until we started researching for this, there are a number of films that Bob Dylan has, or that are about Bob Dylan, but he's also kind of had his hand at some films too.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in thinking about it, I'm sure there are examples I'm going to forget, but apart from the 2 films we're going to focus in on today, there's 2 Martin Scorsese documentaries about him, No Direction Home and Rolling Thunder Review, the latter of which I have seen. There's also another, not a documentary, but this kind of strange comedy called Masked and Anonymous, which I have not seen. I've heard interesting things about it.
I saw that movie a long time ago.
Yeah.
That was a video store movie for
I was
me.
going to guess
it was a screener that I saw sitting in the back of the video store, and I was like, this movie has Bob Dylan in it? I think I'm going to watch it. And that's a little bit surprising me because we'll get into it a little bit later, but Bob Dylan is he's not on my radar as much as I think he is for other people. But
interesting.
Yeah.
Those are a few. There may be others that I'm forgetting. I believe he appears in The Last Waltz as well. Mm-hmm. So Bob Dylan, as a tried and true musician, is also quite the screen figure too.
Yeah, I mean, he was also in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which is part of the influence for the Billy the Kid character in one of the films we're going to talk about.
That's very true. He also recorded the main soundtrack song for the film Wonder Boys. Have you guys seen that movie?
No. I haven't, no.
Yeah, that's a good movie. Nice. If memory serves. I have not seen it since it came out in theaters. But
Nice.
I remember that movie being quite good, and I remember the music being good too. So yeah, we're going to be talking a lot of Bob Dylan today.
And quickly, before we get into any specific films, just one quick question for you both. Have either of you ever seen him in concert?
I've seen him twice.
Twice.
Yes.
Okay.
I have never seen him in concert.
I've seen him once. When did you see him, Madeline?
So I saw him. I think that there is an argument to be made that Bob Dylan was my first concert, but it would be, I think, an argument, which is when my brother turned 16, we went to a music festival in Atlanta for his birthday that Bob Dylan was playing at, along with a lot of other people. I don't have very strong memories of this festival or of Bob Dylan's performance in particular, but I do have strong memories of getting very, very overheated at this festival in the middle of Georgia and going to the first aid station and them telling me they thought I had appendicitis.
Wow.
Which
Okay.
was terrifying to 8-year-old me. And no, I did not have appendicitis. I still have my appendix. But Bob Dylan was somewhere on the premises as I was getting this first aid treatment, I assume. So that was the first time. And second time, he played at a minor league baseball stadium for the Greensboro Grasshoppers when I was about 12 or 13. And that one I have more specific memories of.
Nice. Yeah, so now that you mentioned this, I mean, I think I've technically been present at a Bob Dylan concert twice, but I've only seen him with my eyes once. Because when I was around 11 years old, he played at the Prospect Park Bandshell in Brooklyn, and I think my parents and I found out about it too soon to it happening to actually buy tickets, but we loitered outside, as many people do at that venue. So I heard him singing a few songs at that age, but I wasn't really like a fully minted fan yet at that point. I appreciated him, but I didn't know much of his music. I then so 11 years after that, in 2019, I actually saw him with my eyes at the Beacon Theater, and which I think he frequently plays when he's in New York. And at that point, I actually had, a sense of Bob Dylan to the extent that one can have one. And I, was familiar with a lot of his songs, and I went to that concert as a fan. And I mean, I think I don't get starstruck so often these days, but one of my main anecdotes for times when I did get starstruck is from that concert of just, seeing him pick up that harmonica and thinking, after seeing all these iconic clips from across a span of many years, just seeing him do that and thinking, he's doing it.
He's doing the thing.
He's doing the thing. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. I have not seen him in concert, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but I grew up with parents that really did not dig Bob Dylan. And so I didn't get off to the greatest start when it came to actually appreciating him. And I think over time, I started to appreciate him a little bit more. And to be honest, the first time I think I really dug in to some of his stuff was after seeing the first movie that we're going to talk about, Don't Look Back. I happened to see that movie when I was in college. It was on the syllabus for a class specifically about documentary film and cinema verite. And that class had a bunch of great films, actually, some really meaningful stuff that I saw and was really, really into. But so that was actually my biggest introduction to him. And it didn't actually carry over too far, admittedly, but I got into him a little bit more. So so we're talking Don't Look Back first. It should be said that Don't Look Back is not to be confused with the song Don't Look Back in Anger,
Oasis.
which is the Oasis song.
So Sally can wait.
There you go. Absolutely. Yeah. And I should say that the first four measures of that song should not be confused with John Lennon's Imagine.
Very good point.
Yeah. But that's a good song, and it's far and away the superior song to the other Oasis song that I think in just guitar circles is more of a punchline than anything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we're not discussing that song.
We should say that it's not also to be confused with Look Back in Anger, which is the 1959 Tony Richardson film.
Oh, right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was trying to do some Googling to see if the Oasis song was at all named after this film. I could not find any confirmation of that, but there's, only that one word difference.
Yeah. It seems like the title of this movie, we'll get into it a little bit later, but is in direct reference to a quote that just ends with Don't Look Back.
Yeah.
Right. Quickly, before we get any deeper in, there are some other titles that look very similar to this one. This film is also not to be confused with Don't Look Now. the 1973 horror film directed by Nicholas Roeg, starring the recently deceased Donald Sutherland, R.I.P., and Julie Christie.
And the still alive Julie Christie.
The still alive Julie
That's
Christie,
true.
yes.
Yep.
Should also not be confused with Don't Look Up, the apocalyptic comedy from just a few years ago, directed by Adam McKay, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Meryl Streep, Jennifer Lawrence, and a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah.
And Kate Blanchett is also in that movie.
And Kate Blanchett, yes.
Very true.
Notably.
Yeah. Did you guys know that there's actually a horror movie that came out 4 years ago that's called Don't Look Back?
I saw that when researching for this bit.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. I did too. Apparently from the creator of Final Destination, whose name is Jeffrey Reddick. We're not talking about Don't Look Back. And that movie actually...
We are talking about...
Well, we're not talking about Don't Look Back, and there would be no way to know the difference if you were just listening to me speak. But the movie Don't Look Back, the 2020 horror film that we just discussed, has an apostrophe between the N and the T in the word don't. So it's treated as a contraction.
Which is not the case with
the
film we're discussing.
Yeah.
The 1967 documentary by D.A. Pennebaker. I believe the first film to depict Bob Dylan.
From my understanding too, this is, he was fairly new on the scene when he was following him around. Mm-hmm. This was the spring of 1965.
Yes.
And so I think by this point, Dylan was maybe 4 years into a public career, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the episode of Bob Dylan's career that the film captures is basically the end of his earlier acoustic phase, right on the precipice of his electric turn.
That's true.
And it's, if you're just watching the film without any sense of what came after, you wouldn't know that. But, anyone who knows the history would be aware of that.
I feel like there are a few hints at that. And one that I'm thinking of, I know we're not getting too much into the discussion of the film quite yet, but when we see like the girls on the sidewalk, like screaming up at his hotel room, and then the next scene is like him actually talking to them, and one of them is telling him directly, I don't like Subterranean Homesick Blues.
That's right.
It doesn't sound like you.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a fair point.
And he's like, oh, well, like my friends were playing with me on like, guitar and drums, and like, don't you want my friends to have jobs?
Right. Don't you want them to have a career
or whatever?
Yeah.
And then later, in a later scene, he's talking to a band that seems to be covering some of his music, and he was like, "Oh, do you guys use electric guitars?" So I feel like there are kind of these sprinkles of he knows like he wants to do something different.
Yeah,
but it's not the main focus of this film, although it is definitely in the next film. In one of the sections, referenced pretty specifically.
Yeah, and also in Don't Look Back, this is depicting a period when the most recent album he had released was Bringing It All Back Home, which is that's a good album when you look at the split of one side versus another of a record. It's a great vinyl album in that regard, in that the first half really is an electric album and the second half is acoustic. Yeah. So you get the sense he hadn't fully committed to electric yet, as he would notoriously do at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965. But, the hint, the more than hint is there at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I actually dug through some crates and I found a paper that I wrote.
A physical copy?
Not a physical copy.
An essay.
Yes, I wrote an essay for this class, and I cut together some stuff directly from this paper to start, I guess, this conversation and to give a slight synopsis on what happens in this film. Don't Look Back is a fly-on-the-wall account of Bob Dylan's 3-week tour of England in the spring of 1965, and considered by many to be one of the first rockumentaries, a subgenre of documentary film concerned with popular music. Its director, D.A. Pennebaker, cut his teeth on music-minded shorts during the 1950s and Drew Associates verite-style documentaries in the early 1960s before he took his camera across the pond. Dylan is received enthusiastically by the public that, in some moments, brings some of that Beatlemania energy that they recently had unleashed. We see that going from Greenwich Village wonderkind to international folk hero had its growing pains for Dylan. He is seen laughing at reporters' questions, answering them vaguely on purpose, taking jabs at the press. It's clear that fame and notoriety makes him uncomfortable. And it's unclear whether he sabotages interviews because he doesn't care how the public perceives him, or that he cares to create a public perception of himself as a saboteur and iconoclast. Either way, Don't Look Back shows the newly minted voice of a generation Bob Dylan swimming against a media current, trying to use his personality, not his music, to define him and make sense of the worldwide impact he's having on culture.
A+.
Well
Thank
said.
you. All right.
Evidently, this was not a first-time viewing for you, Emilio, but it was a first-time viewing for me.
Same here.
I was well aware of the importance of this movie. One key flashpoint for that is that, as I mentioned in our previous episode about Spinal Tap, I am a fan of the TV show Documentary Now, which in the beginning of every episode of that show, there's a little highlight reel of famous documentaries from the history of the form, and the clip that opens Don't Look Back of Bob Dylan going through those cue cards as Subterranean Homesick Blues plays in the audio, that a brief clip of that is shown at the beginning of every episode of Documentary Now.
Which is the very start of the documentary itself.
Yes, it is. So that was the image I had in my head of this before watching it. But there are still a lot of images from Don't Look Back that are some of the most iconic images of Bob Dylan, period. And quotes from the film, too.
Yeah, I'd say this movie is a really interesting one because it does capture, and we were alluding to it a little bit before, but it really does seem to capture him at this moment where it seems like things could go in a very different direction for him. Yeah.
It's interesting to note the release time of Don't Look Back as well, because the film was shot in 1965, but was released 2 years later in 1967, which in the life of Dylan is also a notable period because, I mean, he's progressed as an artist in this time. Since the film has come out, he's also released Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde. And somewhere, I don't know if it's before or after the release of the film, John Wesley Harding is in 1967 too. But also, quite notably, Dylan had retreated from the public eye at this time after a motorcycle crash.
Yeah.
So he was not touring. And so I imagine part of the appeal of the film was that in a time when you could not go and see him live, this gave people a rather vivid glimpse at his life.
Absolutely. I think that's a good observation.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, I think now is a good time to start getting into discussion questions about the film itself. And one that I have that is just a little more broadly about music documentaries as well is that, well, so the lives and careers of musicians are a through line of the history of documentary filmmaking. Don't Look Back is an early example of a prominent documentary, and there are still films to this day and at every point in between, prominent documentaries that are specifically about musicians. What do you think it is about musicians specifically that make for such strong documentary subjects? And do you think the form works best when there's a sense of mystery or rarity about the musician subject? Is that necessary or not? I have some thoughts to kick this off. So on the Criterion channel, where I watched Don't Look Back, there's also quite a lot of interesting bonus material about the film. And there's one short documentary. It's not even strictly about this film, just an interview with D.A. Pennebaker and some associates. It's titled, It Starts With Music. And right at the beginning, D.A. Pennebaker kind of says, as a sort of a mission statement, that musicians are, I'm paraphrasing here, that musicians are fascinating subjects because they get to do exactly what they want to do. They get the resources to do it. And when they're in the act, it seems that nothing else matters. And this is a direct quote from him. That is as close to sainthood as I know. Yeah, I think it's very well said. And I mean, of course, as a musician, I enjoy seeing musician subjects depicted on screen, but I think that's a great point in favor of why musicians are such great documentary subjects. But what do you both think about that?
I would say that the quote that you just said there seems like a really good insight into the mind of D.A. Pennebaker, because I mean, he was interested in depicting music on film before he released this, but I think in the wake of this film, he kind of became the preeminent music documentarian.
Yeah.
You know, he helmed Monterey Pop, which is a massive document of music. He also did the recording of the original cast album of Company.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a really interesting film to watch in and of itself.
Inspiration for a very memorable documentary now.
Absolutely. Yeah. But, he also did documentaries covering Jimi Hendrix, more specifically David Bowie, and so he kind of became one of the head guys. I'll also mention another quote that I found digging back through some of the stuff that or some of the research that I did for that essay. I came across this, which is that he was talking about. He had an interview with the Times Union in 2002 or so, and he said that for him, covering musicians, quote, has a lot more to do with the personalities involved. He says, for me to decide on whether they're a good band or a bad band would almost be immaterial. They could be a bad band and make a wonderful film. And so I think in some ways, there's something that he likes more about music itself. What music, like you say, kind of unlocks for the person performing it and for the audience that's receiving it, that is just really, really exciting. And I would agree. I think there's something about artists making their art and you seeing the art happening in real time that is kind of cool about live music. It's actually kind of a rare thing, painters, you hardly ever see them actually putting together a masterpiece, or filmmakers, you're looking very specifically at what they've shot and edited.
Right.
And for musicians, you do get an opportunity to see it unfold in front of you.
Yeah.
In a very particular way.
Yeah. Some of my favorite scenes from this film are like the scenes that are often backstage or in hotel rooms where he's playing very casually, or other people are playing very casually, or they're jamming together, they're playing for each other. But I forget what song it is that Bob Dylan is playing and Joan Baez is kind of coming up with the harmonies on the spot. And I just think that feels like a very authentic, like earnest moment in this film that oftentimes, we'll probably get into this, Bob Dylan doesn't necessarily come across that well and like as a nice person or like a pleasant person to be around through much of it. Maybe that's just my interpretation, but I feel like when
I'm with you.
But I feel like the scenes where you do just get him and Joan Baez or Donovan or whoever just like hanging out and jamming and playing music for each other, like those are very sweet, and definitely brings me to his side, even though at times he kind of lost me.
Sure. Yeah, there is something really cool about the fact that it's not just music performance. It's something that they live with day to day.
Yeah. I have to say too about, that run of scenes that there was, the song that there is a song that you see Joan Baez playing where it's just her on her own. There, Bob Dylan's not accompanying. I think he's writing at the time that she's playing it.
It's on his freaking typewriter. It's so loud.
Yeah, he is.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's clickety clack on his typewriter. That Joan Baez song. I was trying to look it up to see if it's on a record. I don't think it's released anywhere else, which is a huge bummer because it's an awesome song that she's playing there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like you get, just as a viewer, you get this kind of slice of life look at these figures who you might at the time have thought were larger than life. And, probably in the time since, one would think that too. And like in thinking about how D.A. Pennebaker approached this documentary, I mean, he was, he like had this specific interest in the subject of Bob Dylan, but a lot of the day-to-day of filming was pretty informal, where he was, just kind of going around and like, I actually picked up a quote from him from the commentary on the film that he says, "I have no memory of what makes me shoot where, I just go with what happens." And that in a lot of moments, he was kind of just shooting things, with a handheld camera. A lot of times people in the room didn't even know that he was shooting.
Yeah. That's very in keeping with the verite approach to documentary filmmaking that he is one of the luminaries of.
Absolutely.
No.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this, as it's an early example of the form, there's an informality to this documentary that I think kind of like it kind of erodes over time in the evolution of documentary as a form. And, I'm just thinking about how much of a trailblazer this film is, and, how much D.A. Pennebaker is a trailblazer in his own right. Another question that I thought of for this conversation was, given the informality of D.A. Pennebaker's approach, do you think that like a similarly compelling documentary could have existed at around the same time about a different figure? Or is this really, only something that could have existed about Bob Dylan with his interactions with the press and with his peers?
I feel like I have two thoughts on this, but one of them kind of goes back to something you said, Emilio, I think it was you earlier, about how, this, and we've talked a little bit about, this is kind of a transitionary period for Dylan. Mm-hmm. And I think that is ultimately part of what makes this film work, is that he is in a kind of tumultuous, feels like the wrong word, but like there is you said growing pains, I think was the term earlier. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what's so interesting, is seeing this person who is suddenly blowing up and doesn't really know what to do with it. Yeah. And I feel like that probably could have been used with, like, that could have been the case with other musicians as well, if they happen to be caught at the moment when they were really blowing up. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it necessarily had to be Dylan, but my second thought is that he is willing to play ball.
He is.
And that maybe he's just like this, but I do think that he's playing up some of this hostility towards reporters, and I think he's playing some of this up for the camera potentially.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know that every musician would have been willing to do that, but it does kind of make for a really compelling film.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I think there is an argument, and this is very low-hanging fruit, but you could say that another very important musician or musical act at this time that was also going through a bit of a transition state was the Beatles.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, 65, 66, I think, was the time where they were... I think some of the honeymoon phase of them as, darlings in the media was kind of starting to change a little bit. Mm-hmm. And they were seeing some of the backlash, I think, of all the fame that they were experiencing. And I know that not too long after this, and definitely by the time this film had been released, they decided that they no longer wanted to be a band that toured, and they just wanted to record in the studio and just focus on the music, make great records. And so, I could see another documentary. Now, would it have necessarily the same feel? Like you said, Madeline, this has a really particular feel because it is Dylan, and because Dylan's association to the genre of folk, I think, was so specific that you're not going to get if it's the Beatles. So it is that sweet spot.
And I think it's the folk musician who's becoming very commercialized, and these two things kind of in conflict. Mm-hmm. That's part of what makes Dylan's early career really interesting, and part of what makes this film really interesting. Yeah. Because he clearly is he's holding on to the authenticity of being like a Greenwich Village folk musician, but he clearly doesn't fully identify with that role anymore and that label. And he says outright several times, I'm not a folk musician.
Right.
But I think the authenticity that comes with that is something that he doesn't want to let go of.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's, even though it's obvious for a person alive at the time that this came out, something that, we have to remember as people who exist in this modern age is that access like this to an artist was much more limited back then.
Yeah.
Even for a megastar like Bob Dylan or the Beatles. And that, in this age of social media and all that, we have this illusion of access to public figures that, was not possible back then. Right. I think too that at that time, because of course Bob Dylan was not touring when the film came out, there had to have been just a simple pleasure of seeing him perform live, as is done in the film itself, because D.A. Pennebaker, many of the well-known sequences in the film are of Dylan having these contentious interactions with reporters and the like, and also just, walking amidst hordes of fans, but also simply of him performing.
Yeah.
I have to admit, this was the first time watching this film that I saw any footage of Bob Dylan perform.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, back when I was 19 or 20 when I first saw this. But one of the things I think coming to Bob Dylan kind of late was by the time I first saw this film, there was an association of Bob Dylan as a like degraded live performer.
Unfortunately, he is kind of a punchline sometimes
Yes.
when it comes to his vocal stylings.
Right. And anybody who's looking for authentic reproductions of the recorded music he's put out from this earlier era, it will most likely be disappointed. I mean, I don't know. You saw him very recently. How did you feel about seeing him live?
I honestly thought it was great. I think that, he's whatever your opinion on his vocal stylings, he's a very consistent performer.
There we go. See, and
yeah.
that there's something to that.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That speaks volumes.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. And so just to comment or to piggyback on what you said, it was really cool for me as a young person to see this much live concert footage of him, because he's great. He's really, really good in this film. You can see why he is so compelling as a musical artist.
And that's the thing that stuck out to me in the descriptions. And we even kind of see this in the concert footage. He's in these gigantic performance halls, these huge venues, and just everyone, it's like you could hear a pin drop.
Right.
Like, and that I think is so rare, particularly now. I think it's becoming rarer and rarer. Like you can't even really go to Broadway anymore without people like texting in front of you the whole time, or like singing along with the songs on Broadway or whatever. So to see a solo acoustic performer with an acoustic guitar and a harmonica be able to fill up like a thousands and thousands seat hall with people who are just totally engaged is really, really interesting. And I think speaks so much to his presence as a performer.
Yeah. And I think they allude to this also throughout the film. That's starting to become a thing I say now a lot.
Allude,
yes. They reference it a lot throughout the film, that his lyrics are something that people are really drawn to.
Yeah.
And I think throughout the film, the press kind of comes in and out of commenting on his lyrics as if you're having the Bob Dylan experience, this is something that you're contending with.
Right.
It's like, what's your relationship to what he's talking about? Not necessarily like, is he a great guitar player? Is he a great harmonica player? Does he sing on pitch? It's the lyrics, I think.
Yeah, but then he makes kind of odd comments about how he doesn't actually have a message and how he doesn't have anything to say about any of these songs. He just writes them.
Yeah.
And I found that very odd.
Well, I think that is where you start to see the media fatigue with him.
Totally.
He's
just tired of talking about it.
Absolutely.
It's like, just listen to it. I already said it.
Right. Yeah, because I think that especially when you listen to those songs of his early period, I mean, these are, they're beautifully written songs, but they're not like cagey in their subject matter. They're very transparent.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about things based on like, evils of the real world, a song like The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll or something like that. It's very apparent what that song is about. And I think he probably had some very honest irritation when reporters were just asking him for a deeper message about that. And Madeline, there was a question that you came up with that I feel like it's good to get into now.
So I feel like Bob Dylan would have liked, and probably still wants, the public to believe that he didn't care about his image. But I think that this film paints a portrait of a person who's in a pretty fragile state, that we talked about the growing pains. He's constantly hostile to reporters, even his own team. He says repeatedly that he doesn't really believe in anything, isn't aiming for any kind of message. So considering he and Albert Grossman, his manager, supposedly had a lot of input in this film and the cut of the doc, Albert Grossman is a producer on this film. What do we think their aim was in putting this particular image out to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really fascinating time for the music business. And we get little glimpses of that, particularly with Albert Grossman and I think some kind of concert promoter that Albert Grossman seems to be putting the screws on.
Right.
It's kind of funny, actually, that interaction. But you can even see with this promoter that he is like, did you see where this song's going? It jumped from 40-something to 6. It's like there are all these weird metrics that are brand new to the industry. And I think that along with the commercialization and the kind of drive for there to be profit, at the end of all this, that there's also just the personal interest side of this. And that's where the reporters come in. And so I have to imagine that some of their interest in having this film made or having input in how it ended up coming out had something to do with controlling the image.
Yeah.
And I know that it doesn't necessarily look great, and maybe that's up to personal opinion, but I think there is a read on this where his earnestness or his fatigue, and the reasons for why he might be responding the way he is becomes very clear. Yeah. And so you actually get a bit of a sympathetic portrait of him at times. And I would argue that at times you do.
I totally agree. I just want to quickly say that the name of the agent that you reference is Tito Burns. Who,
thank you.
According to Wikipedia, was a former bebop dance band leader.
Hey, I could see it.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, and then also in the commentary that's on Criterion Channel, which included D.A. Pennebaker and Bob Newworth, who was the tour manager at that time, they were saying that Albert Grossman was actually, as managers go, a kind of a model manager, that he was someone who was actually like sincerely interested in Bob Dylan as an artist, and was a kind of manager that at the time they were recording it, they were basically saying that kind doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Real quick, don't look it up. How old is Albert Grossman in this movie? Just guess.
I mean, because you're asking, I'm like, he's going to be like 35. But I mean, the man looks at least 50.
I was going to guess
38. Going on 39.
I was going to guess 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Looking at him too, I'm like, you could be 60 and I would be like, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. That guy has clearly done some living.
Yeah. You're talking about age though. And I was just thinking that at the time that this is being filmed, Bob Dylan is very, very young.
Very young.
Yeah. So I do feel like I need to give young Bob Dylan some grace that if you throw a camera on, how old is he at this time?
I think he's like
23.
23 going on 24.
24-year-old, like 24/7 for 3 weeks, then you're going to catch them saying a lot of pretentious bullshit.
Yeah. Also, probably some of it is, for the sake of pretentiousness. Some of it is just for the sake of like, I don't have time to think this through. I just need to get something to, to say something to get this guy off of my case. And that's what results in things like, are you arguing against something you're angry about? I'm not angry.
Yeah,
that sort of stuff. But yeah, so just to think about, part of your question, Madeline, was, what do you think the aim was in putting this image out there? And I feel like, kind of fittingly with the documentary approach of this, I think probably no one knew exactly where these questions or answers were going as they were being said, not even Dylan himself. And so maybe there was some sense that he was just kind of answering nervously in the moment, but then realized in hindsight, wait, that sounds good, and I can build a little more mystique from this. And I think, as he, as time wore on, and he became a little more settled into this mold of famous person, then he learned how to handle that stuff a little more gracefully.
Yeah, we didn't have quite the same kind of media training in 1960s that we do now.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if a film like this would actually be shown in media training. It's just like, there's a way to do this, and then there's this way, or you know.
But also if you want to be Bob Dylan, then clearly it worked for him.
Right.
Yeah. And the myth building exists before even this movie is made, because even just the name Bob Dylan, that's a very consciously put together stage name.
Absolutely.
On his part. I feel like at that young age, it's, his image has been so crystallized by time, but he was probably thinking on his feet a lot more than we would like to believe. And even though he has this reputation as this very cagey public figure, I feel like this film both contributes to that image and kind of demystifies it too, in suggesting that some of this was probably just him struggling to stay afloat socially.
Yeah. It's funny because he's just talking, and sometimes you get a very strong presence. And one of the questions I posed to you guys was, there are two, I think, very memorable interactions that he has with reporters in this film. And the first one with this younger reporter, Terry Ellis is his name, which it took me a while to figure out, even though it's out there, I think, for people to find. It's such a vibe.
Yeah.
Like watching it, it's about 7-8 minutes that they're going back and forth with one another. And watching it this time, it really felt like a linchpin, I think, to the whole movie, because there is a phoniness, I find, to both of them.
Totally.
That just ping pongs back and forth between being relatable and also off-putting. And I'm just really curious, who did you guys find yourselves siding with in this exchange, if you did, and why?
Well, it's interesting. I watched this twice this week, and the first time, and even the second time, I was like, who is this?
Yes. You're talking about the reporter?
Yeah, the reporter, because he keeps saying, I'm not a journalist. I don't consider myself a journalist. I'm like, then who are you? So I had to Google it. And he was like a music reporter for his college newspaper. So he's also presumed to be pretty young.
Yeah.
And I think that adds to the insufferable quality that comes across from both of them.
Yes.
Is that it's two guys like kind of dick slinging in like their early 20s.
Right. It's funny because it does feel like both of them touch a nerve with one another.
And neither of them, I think, want to fully let on to that, because they each kind of want to come out like on top. Feels like the wrong way to word it, because obviously Terry Ellis is not going to come out on top, but they each want to be the smartest guy in the room.
Terry Ellis literally just sort of wants, I guess, some earnestness from the answers. It feels like what seems to bother him is that he feels like he's kind of being attacked in some way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like he's bothered by the idea that he might sound like dumb or come off as being ignorant. It's just like, it seems like he asks questions and what he gets back is just a bunch of like, your questions don't matter to me.
Yeah. And I understand why that would be frustrating, but he also, I think, has a sense of entitlement that is very off-putting, because he's like, I come into these interviews and they don't even want to know me. And it's like, well, no, that's not anybody's job in this dynamic.
Right.
Like, you are there to interview. It does not matter if Bob Dylan wants to be your friend or not. So I see both sides of this, because obviously I do think that to a certain extent, Bob Dylan and any other musicians or artists that this guy's interviewing have an obligation to provide some sort of answer.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be specific. It doesn't have to be long-winded, but it does feel like Bob is like ribbing on him to a like unnecessary extent.
Right.
But I also think that the reporter is asking for too much.
Yeah. I mean, a broader point that's made throughout this film is that the press, when they have a figure like Bob Dylan to focus in on, they're just going to write things no matter, how accurate they are or not. And there's other quotes that come up, like early in the movie, there's one that actually is reiterated in I'm Not There, something to the effect of puffing heavily on a cigarette. He smokes 80 a day, where they're like, overstating that aspect of his life. And then there's something that Alan Price, who's the Animals member, who's recently, I think, left the band, is saying in one scene when he is also present. He's reading a paper saying, is Donovan deserting his fans? He's only been around 3 months. And so, it's just like this tabloid journalism, aiming to sensationalize things that really don't deserve that same treatment. Because, there's all these different quotes throughout the movie that seem to be pitting Bob Dylan and Donovan against each other, and then you see them just hanging out together.
They come
in the
together
same space.
and they're like so respectful of each other.
Right.
Like, Donovan plays first and everyone's very complimentary and applauds. And then afterwards he like requests a specific song from Bob Dylan that Bob then plays, which is very sweet. I like their dynamic a lot, even though, they're kind of presented in the press as rivals. And kind of going back to the question at hand, I see why, I think, to what you're saying, Julian, I see why it would be exhausting to be Bob Dylan in this scenario where you just got here, you're immediately bombarded by reporters. They're printing like lies or exaggerations about you. You're like, well, why do I want to go through any more of these interviews?
Mm-hmm. Right. But, you know, his handlers have clearly put these people in front of him.
That's true.
Because it's an interesting document of how new this whole ecosystem is.
Yeah.
You know, his managers don't necessarily know what's best for him.
Right.
There might be a feeling for them that bad press or any press is great press.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe Bob Dylan keeps agreeing to these interviews because he, you know, has some maybe naive hope that someone's going to interview him who's actually worth his time at some point. Or he just keeps, you know, coming up against these people who, you know, are asking him these unsatisfying questions. And going back to Terry Ellis specifically, I mean, I got the sense that, you know, the drive in him is something that's shared with a lot of other reporters, which is this, you know, sense of getting at some kind of greater depth in the artist. And I feel like, you know, part of what Bob Dylan is trying to say in response is just like, you know, we're both human beings. Like what is there about me that, you know, you can't already pick up on?
Yeah.
And there was actually a point that a quote that I picked up from that very conversation where I think Terry Ellis says, "I'm out in the world for myself." And Bob Dylan responds, "Then you and I are alike." Mm-hmm. Yeah. And well, that's, you know, maybe the only point when they seem to really be in agreement throughout that whole conversation. And so it kind of leads to a satirical edge in his building of mythology, of self-mythologizing.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any little details that we picked up on that we just found were really fun?
I've got to mention one thing, which is actually like an unintentionally very funny moment in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, as a viewer, it's obviously funny, but it was not intended to be so in the moment, which is, I think there's a moment early on where like Bob Dylan and his whole entourage are getting a noise complaint in their hotel. And there's a moment like, you know, I think that I forget exactly who, whether it's Albert Grossman or Bob Newirth, someone is speaking to the person making the complaint. And for a moment, Bob Dylan pokes his head out, I think from another
doorway
room,
or something.
From a doorway. And then someone immediately pulls him back. Is like, no, don't show your face here.
Nice.
Yeah, I like Albert Grossman's interaction with the hotel staff.
It's pretty great.
In that whole scene, even though I feel bad for the hotel staff to a certain extent. Albert Grossman is like, if we were anywhere else, I'd punch you in the nose.
Yeah. I love too how he flips a switch. Like he goes from being like, okay, well, you know, bring a constable here. And then the moment he feels like he has the upper hand, he just goes so low.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, pretty incredible. He uses the word fop.
I had to Google that.
Which is one of my all-time favorite insults.
What does it
needs
mean?
a comeback. Like, I don't know. Gen Z, like, can you guys do something about that?
We'll work on it.
Yeah. I like in that same, I think kind of towards the beginning of the argument, the hotel staff is like, are you in charge of Bob Dylan? And he's like, no one's in charge of Bob Dylan.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Another detail that I have to point out in the very last scene of the movie, when you see Bob Dylan in a cab after finishing his one of his Royal Albert Hall performances, is that also at that time Albert Grossman is relaying to him this, you know, another anecdote of the toxic press calling him an anarchist now.
Because communism is too cool in England.
Communism is too cool, and also, you know, it's they're calling him an anarchist just because he doesn't offer any solution, so to speak. But then you can also hear someone, I'm not sure who, but someone else in that car is humming, "It's all over now, baby blue."
That's right.
The movie's over.
And the movie's over, yeah. I do love that scene, though, too, because it ends on such an incredible note of, like, and he even says it. He's like, I feel like something happened back there.
Yeah.
And then it's like right away, he's just reminded of the fact that the moment he gets off stage, he's going to be hit with all this stuff from the press, all this stuff that he's been challenged with the whole time we've seen him. And so, yeah, I know. It's great. It's a wonderful note to end on, I think.
Exactly.
What did you guys think of the high sheriff's lady? I thought she was very fun. And she seemed to have two sons, both named Stephen. She was like, these are my boys, Stephen and Stephen. That's what the subtitles said. That's what I heard too.
Okay. Yeah. Were there three?
There were three. It was like, I forget what the third one's name was, but the second and third were both named Stephen.
I just remember the third one looking the most like
Yeah.
like starstruck.
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
like, they're huge fans.
Yeah. She was very. I love too. She, in a very like politician type way.
Definitely.
She was like, "Oh, you're his friend. You and him are invited next time to
my
our place."
mansion.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like she's a very unique type of presence that we see Dylan in front of, because she's not like a young adoring fan. She's also not the press, but she also has an agenda.
Yeah.
And
she's complimentary, but you can tell that, she has an agenda with it. You can't tell if she's being totally honest when she's saying like, oh, he's such a great influence on the youth.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like somebody fed her that line, and she's like, "I'm okay. All right, I'll say it." Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to mention. There's a shot in this movie that I remember from the first time I saw it, but when I saw it again this time, I got flooded with so many thoughts. I'm going to try to share them as briefly as I can. So there's a shot of the reporter in a phone booth who's calling into the paper that he works for.
Oh, I love that scene.
I love this scene on so many levels. So you're not only reminded of a simpler time when, to make a deadline, a writer would call in their story and dictate it to someone there. Is just such a cool touch.
Even with like paragraph breaks and like semicolons.
Exactly. I love that. I love too that I really felt watching it, there's like a true respect for the work of the writer, that the writer and their words matter. And I love that this writer's face is now preserved on screen and would ultimately become associated with their writing. And I know that they're not actually named, but I think there's just something really cool about that. And the other thing I love about this scene so much is that if you look closely, you can vaguely see the cameraman in the reflection of the phone booth window pane or like glass pane. And you see their like hand on the lens, focusing and zooming and reframing the subject. And it's such a cool shot because it feels at once so matter of fact, almost like uncinematic, but it's also like so cinematic for how it captures these two mediums in like a double exposure. And I just thought that was so cool. It's everything that I would want out of like what was known as like the verite style and then some. It's just such a loaded scene. I love that moment.
Yeah, and part of the whole thing of verite is that a lot of these moments are happy accidents too.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else?
Oh yeah, one last thing, to actually briefly come off of what you just said. I mean, it came up earlier too that D.A. Pennebaker was often a pretty discreet cameraman, that he would, at least in this movie, that he, would be filming and people weren't immediately aware of it. He was holding his camera in his hand, which kind of made me think of some of the stuff that the members of Spinal Tap were joking about in the commentary for that film.
Literally, like halfway through what you were saying, I was like, I know where you're going with this. How they would be like, I don't even remember him being there. Why do we let him in for this?
Right.
Infrared cameras. But then, the other point to bring up from that is that one of the scenes where they mention that in Spinal Tap is during the Hello Cleveland scene. And there is a very close parallel in Don't Look Back. The difference being that they're not lost, but there is this long extended shot of Bob Dylan and his whole entourage exiting a venue. Yeah. That is, I think, had to have been somewhere on the mind of Rob Reiner.
Yeah, very meandering. Dougie pointed that out as we were watching.
Yeah. And it was mentioned like when in doing research for Spinal Tap that Don't Look Back was a big influence on that movie too. And that was one moment where I thought like almost 1-to-1.
Yeah. Well, there's one last thing I wanted to mention too, which is I did not know about this before researching for our conversation, but that the next year in 1966, Dylan had D.A. Pennebaker, I think, back in England with him to record another documentary that he had a little bit more of a strong hand in editing, but that it didn't, I think, turn out the way he hoped. And I think it was released much later, but it's called Eat the Document.
Yeah.
And I was looking around a little bit to see if I could confirm this one way or the other, but it seems like he did not like this.
Bob Dylan
did not like the finished product of this, even though he had such a hand in putting it together. So I find that interesting too, that, before this film was released, before there could be any public response to it, he liked the filmmakers. He liked the cameras being there enough that he wanted to do it again.
Yeah, it says something.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually D.A. Pennebaker and Bob Newworth said in the commentary that even though, Dylan had this contentious attitude towards reporters and the like, that he, with the filmmakers, he was very even tempered all the time, that he was, he really took kindly to them.
Cool.
And that's evidence of it. All right.
I think it's a great time to transition.
Yes. So now we're going to discuss, as we've outlined, there are many films about Bob Dylan, but the next one we're going to discuss here on this podcast is I'm Not There. So we've gotten into some of the details about this film, but before we get any further in, we should clarify I'm Not There is not to be confused with the film I'm Still Here, which is released a few years later in 2010, the mockumentary that depicts what appeared to be real but turned out to be a career stunt on the part of Joaquin Phoenix when he forewent acting for a rap career.
Yeah.
It all turned out
still very puzzling.
Still puzzling, but yes, released just a few years apart, not to be confused with.
Also not to be confused with I'm Not Here, which is a film from 2017 by director Michelle Schumacher, starring J.K. Simmons and Sebastian Stan. I know nothing about this movie.
Neither do I. I just found out
that.
about it because of the bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently what I could surmise from this is that J.K. Simmons is kind of like an older guy who's reflecting back on his life, and somehow in reflecting back, he's able to, I don't know, bring about some peace in some of the bad decisions that he's made. I don't know, maybe there's a supernatural element to this. I don't know, but yeah.
Also, quickly before we get into it, this should not be confused with The Man Who Wasn't There.
That's true.
Coen Brothers film from 2001. One of the very few films of theirs that I still have yet to see. Neo-noir starring Billy Bob Thornton.
Yep. James Gandolfini's in it too.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And Frances McDormand.
Yeah. I
Well,
would have
that
guessed
makes
her,
sense.
but not Gandolfini.
Yeah, Gandolfini's in it. Yeah, in a funny role. He plays a little against type.
Interesting.
And before we move on, I'll just mention this film is not to be confused with the film I'm Not Rappaport, which is a film from 1996, which is written and directed by Herb Gardner, starring Walter Matthau and Ossie Davis. This movie is kind of sweet. I saw this movie a long time ago, and it's pretty fun. It's like a Odd Couple style film. Two older guys who become friends first because they dig the same park bench, but eventually for other more meaningful reasons.
This film is also not to be confused with You Were Never Really Here. We already talked about Joaquin Phoenix, but he stars in this film from 2017, directed by Lynn Ramsey.
Yeah, that's an intense movie.
I know. And I'm Still Here. You Were Never Really Here. That is head spinning for Joaquin Phoenix. It's got to be tough.
Yeah, perhaps an unlikely shared universe in there.
Yeah, I know. I got to say, this film that we watched, I'm Not There, is kind of head spinning too.
It is kind of head spinning.
For sure.
Yes, because it depicts Bob Dylan as portrayed in the form of 6 different personas. I'll give a quick summary now of just what exactly this movie is going for. I'm Not There takes a refractive look at the, in quotes, lives of Bob Dylan in the form of 6 different figures. There's the poet, Arthur Rimbaud, stating his views directly to the camera whilst being interrogated and played by Ben Whishaw. There's the prophet, Jack Rollins, played by Christian Bale, a socially conscious folk singer who becomes prominent in the early 1960s before a cascade of events leads him to God and gospel music. There's the outlaw, Billy McCarty, played by Richard Gere, in hiding while widely presumed dead, and forced out of hiding when he learns his nearby town will be demolished to build a highway. Then there's the fake, Woody Guthrie, portrayed by Marcus Carl Franklin, who is not to be confused with the well-known folk singer, but a young African-American boy with the same name and aspirations of a similar sort. Then there's the rock and roll martyr, Jude Quinn, played by Cate Blanchett, the former folk singer who enrages his fans when he iconoclastically embraces the electric guitar whilst rubbing shoulders with fellow cultural icons, proving a cagey and defensive interview subject.
Sounds familiar.
And then there's the star of Electricity, Robbie Clark, played by the late, great Heath Ledger, an actor who portrays Jack Rollins in a biographical film before embodying some of the same renown himself, while also falling in love with a French artist named Claire, leading to a long and storied relationship between the two. And to sum this all up, I'm Not There is a film that essentially asks, how many guises can a man appear in before you may call him portrayed? Had to do it.
Nice. That's good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, well, now we are there.
Yeah, we are there. I'm just wondering for you guys, how did this conceit strike you guys at first? And maybe after thinking about it a little bit, has that changed?
Yeah, I think that I did not fully understand the conceit of this movie before watching it, in that I knew that sort of Bob Dylan-esque characters were played by multiple people, but I kind of assumed it was still kind of a straight narrative rather than 6 separate stories. And I'm way more into this version that actually exists of the 6 specific stories. But when I first heard about it, I assumed it was kind of one straight through story played by different people throughout the timeline, which I think would also be interesting, but would be a very different movie. I'm totally on board with this. I think that I know a lot of people, like I was hearing a lot of reactions of people who were confused by this film, and that's, justified, I guess, but I also feel like I was engaged pretty much the whole time. And, I think each individual story, brings a lot to the overall narrative.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really love this movie. And I had actually seen it before, around 14 years ago, I believe. But yeah, so I had seen it before, but at that time, like similarly to the first time I loitered outside of a Bob Dylan concert, I wasn't really initiated to his music yet. I didn't have much context for it. I could appreciate certain things about it, but I think I saw it when I was 13. My 13-year-old mind missed a lot too. There were some details I remembered, certain scenes like, seeing the real, like in the movie, real Woody Guthrie on his deathbed, or, a lot of the scenes with the Richard Gere form of Bob Dylan. Those, for whatever reason, I just remembered those a little bit more vividly. But I actually have much more of a sense of Bob Dylan now. And so I was really along for the ride this time. And I think, to go back to your initial question, Emilio, that the way that this movie goes about telling the story has always just kind of made sense to me. I think, once I really understood just, the multiplicity of the ways that Bob Dylan has appeared publicly over time, it always just kind of made sense to me that, you can have a few different actors portraying him. I mean, even though this is a very different sort of figure, I think a lot of David Bowie with his different personas that he's adopted over his career. And that
I think that's a very strong comp there.
For sure.
Yeah. And that, each one has been kind of a distinct character. And I think that if you understand Bob Dylan along similar lines, then, the idea of a movie like this one existing, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it would be more difficult to try to make a film with a straightforward narrative throughout Bob Dylan's full life and all of these different periods.
Right.
I think that would be actually more confusing because I think it would be too all-encompassing. Trying to touch on these individual periods while also like diving into his characterization, which is very complicated.
Yeah. I'm still making up my mind on whether or not I really loved this film or not. I enjoyed it. I really liked watching it, and I loved the take on depicting a character or a person, an actual person like Bob Dylan, through several characters. I mean, I feel like one of the things that's really cool about it is I feel like the idea of different characters showing up really helps, I think, really capture the idea of an artist as an evolving thing.
Yeah.
And, the public life and the private lives, are kind of balanced and kind of distilled into one identity. I think that's something that we were mentioning earlier, this idea about social media, I guess, curating a lot for an artist. And I feel like this is like the exact opposite. This is like, here we're gonna present so many eras of this particular artist's life. And I love how fluid it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, in thinking about it in preparation for this conversation, I really had kind of a hard time thinking in my head of like the exact flow of one scene to the other, because it really is such a kaleidoscopic vision.
Yeah, and it's not even just kind of the archetypes and the actors, but each of these types is filmed also in a very different way. I was rewatching a little bit of the beginning of this film today before our conversation, and jumping from the Woody Guthrie section right into the Christian Bale section, which is filmed more as a documentary. And then the Cate Blanchett section is also kind of a documentary more similar to the Don't Look Back actual documentary.
Right.
Like these are all presented in very different ways. And so it's also like these different mediums practically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the movie moves seamlessly in between those different points where the documentary footage is presented as if it was always, well, you know, it is meant to be there, but it's presented as if that's just been the form this whole time when it hasn't.
Yeah, and like some of these are in black and white. Cate Blanchett's section is in black and white. Ben Wishaw's section Cate Blanchett is.
It is.
Okay.
It is. Yeah. No,
I
you're right.
second guess myself because it's so like there's so much happening. Ben
I'm with you.
Wishaw's section is in black and white, but not all of them are. And yeah, I feel like he is filming them intentionally very differently.
Yeah.
I always feel like the Richard Gere section too. I know that a lot of it is shot in exteriors, but it really does feel so different. Like every time it cuts to that story, you're like, it feels like, you know, you're literally watching something at a different frame rate, or like there's like a different filter on the lens. It's
and there's like, and also, I mean, in jumping between all of these different stories, I mean, the film is jumping through time too.
Yeah,
that even within some individual stories, the narrative is nonlinear too. That, you know, with the story of the Heath Ledger character, Robbie Clark, and of his partner Claire, like that story starts kind of at the end.
Yeah. It's kind of a last 5 years type of scenario.
Yeah.
You see the end before you see the beginning there.
And one thing that I like about that section, speaking to what I was saying earlier, is that when you get the scenes from the film within a film, those look different in his section, because that's a film that I think is supposed to be coming out in the early 70s. And so it looks like a film that's coming out in the 70s.
Yeah.
But the rest of his section doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
Is that the Grain of Sand?
Grain of Sand.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, I mean, that struck me as that title made me think of a Tom Paxton song, ironically. The last thing on my mind.
I love that song.
Yeah. It's not Grain of Sand, it's made of sand, made of sand. Yeah. Just appropriate to the era.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing about that movie, the Grain of Sand. So when there's a quick, very brief shot of the poster for that film.
Oh, yeah.
And do you guys know the reference that they're making to
No,
that
but
poster?
it looked very familiar.
It's from a film that I've talked to both of you guys about, which is A Face in the Crowd.
Oh, yeah.
It's a direct reference to the poster for that film.
There is another direct reference.
There is, which comes up right before it when he's on the boxcar. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. He literally, I guess, sings a song or talks about Lonesome Roads, which, is the main character from A Face in the Crowd.
Yeah. Woody Guthrie's character directly quotes A Face in the Crowd. Supposedly Heath Ledger's character directly quotes the film Masculine Feminine. Todd Haynes mentions both of these on the WTF interview.
Okay, cool. That came very like organically to me when I saw that. I was like, oh my God. And then there's quite literally a shot after that looks like it's pulled straight from Face in the Crowd, because that movie is about a character that is a little bit like a Bob Dylan. You know, he's a folk singer, but who in a very sort of fortuitous manner goes from being like a grifter to a massive star. And it's about like how his magnetic personality brings him fame, but also brings about some very undesirable personality traits.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Good eye. So moving on to, I have a question for you guys about the archetypes that we see. So you already mentioned them earlier on, but as a review, we have the poet, the prophet, the outlaw, the fake, the rock and roll martyr, and the star of electricity. And some of these are pretty close parallels to Dylan's real life. We already said Cate Blanchett as Jude Quinn is pretty much directly in reference to Don't Look Look Back. I almost said Don't Look Now, but I caught myself.
Another great movie.
And I'd say the first half of Christian Bale as Jack Rollins also feels like we said that is in like documentary form, but it absolutely feels like somebody telling the story of early Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
But some of these stray much further from our reality. We mentioned Richard Gere as Billy the Kid, but also Christian Bale's like Father John turn in his story. And then as well as Heath Ledger as Robbie Clark. So my question for you guys is, do you think the film is able to maintain the narrative drive even in these sections that are more only loosely related to Bob Dylan?
Yeah.
My answer to that is not as much as I would have liked in this first viewing. That's one of the things that I struggled with a little bit, was dropping and then picking up later and trying to sort of keep the strands all together. Now that's just me. I'm also someone, because of my routines, usually watches movies in like 3 parts. So it's very difficult, I think, for me sometimes to come back to a movie like this, like 2 or 3 days later.
Yeah.
But what I'll say is it is ambitious. I love it. It's a big swing. It might translate better for me if I see this movie again, but I did struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't really struggle with that. I mean, I felt like you have to go in with a certain acceptance of a looseness in it. Just because, I mean, Bob Dylan is this figure who you can try as you might to pin down, but you just can't. And I think that the movie aims for something similar. I know that when Todd Haynes was originally aiming to get the movie made and, presented it to Bob Dylan's manager, Jeff Rosen, I mean, this was like something that was understood about the movie from that point. And I think that's part of why Bob Dylan approved its production. And I think like what's interesting about some of those characters you mentioned who are more distant from the real life of Bob Dylan is that when you watch the movie, the first time you see Richard Gere or someone like him, you think like, what does this have to do with any of it? The first moments. But then, I think it kind of poses a compelling challenge to the viewer to consider, what you might not have initially thought of as a similarity there. That was certainly my impression, even though it's years ago. I certainly had that impression of the Richard Gere character in particular, because that was something that even as, what little I knew about Bob Dylan at that time, I could tell, wait, this in no way directly resembles Bob Dylan, the life that he's lived. But then, now watching that particular part with more context, I mean, yeah, he's meant to be Billy the Kid. And we know, from the, Bob Dylan's involvement in the movie Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, that there is that connection. But also, like, one of the Bob Dylan songs that plays during the Richard Gere segment of the movie is One More Cup of Coffee, which comes from the album Desire, which is from Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder Revue era. I watched the Martin Scorsese documentary about that particular era as well, which is a fascinating era of Bob Dylan in its own right. And it really just felt like the kind of performance style he was going for at that time was like something of the past, like a traveling circus sort of thing almost.
Which gets referenced visually quite a bit in this film.
It does.
Yeah.
And also that, like, in terms of the ages of the actors, that Richard Gere is a noticeable outlier. He's not the only outlier, but, with a lot of these actors, like the median age at that time was somewhere between 30 and 40. But Richard Gere on one end is the oldest actor.
Definitely skews it pretty far. Yeah.
But also there's Marcus Carl Franklin on the other end, who is still a kid.
Yeah.
Playing this version of Bob Dylan. And that's another one who's notably distant from the real Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And almost, there to comment on, something that Bob Dylan would have drawn as an influence and kind of imitated in his own initial persona, but clearly was not. I mean, you see a lot of, like, there's this image in Don't Look Back that is referenced in I'm Not There of Bob Dylan playing for an entirely black crowd.
Yep.
Yeah.
On the back of that flatbed.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then we see that in this also in Christian Bale's section.
Yep.
Exactly. Which worth mentioning too. He has a moment where you can see he's playing the guitar and it's mostly pretty accurate there.
C, G, F, A minor. Pretty good. There's a moment where he seems like he botches like A minor and E minor a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
It's, we can let that pass. Christian Bale.
The
devoted
the
actor.
kid's quite good.
He is, Marcus Carl Franklin.
Yeah, and Lefty, quite good.
Yeah, I thought that was I really like that touch of making only Woody Guthrie a lefty.
Yeah.
Because I think he's the fake, and also I think it adds to the like switching of actors and of narratives.
Yeah,
that
I like that. Yeah,
we have the one lefty. I also, going back to Christian Bale, I think he's too good of a singer for this role.
Interesting.
Which Dougie thinks is intentional. He's like, Christian Bale is more conventionally attractive. He is singing like with a more pleasing timbre, arguably, than Bob Dylan traditionally does. And perhaps this is supposed to be kind of a glossy version of Bob Dylan. That's Dougie's theory.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I felt like it was really going for authenticity there, partially from things like rolling back the imagery that you have associated with Dylan from things like Don't Look Back.
An interesting difference between Don't Look Back and that image that's then referenced in or the way it's referenced in I'm Not There is that in Don't Look Back he's playing different songs across the two movies. In Don't Look Back he's playing Only a Pawn in Their Game, and in I'm Not There the Jack Rollins, the Christian Bale character, is playing The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll.
Right.
But and so then, I mean, it's something that I think is often mentioned about early Bob Dylan that this movie faces head on, is that, the existence of his music, as much as he, is a very popular name, it could not have existed without the influence of African American music going into it. And I think, some Bob Dylan detractors will say that he, is like a white man trying to imitate a black man in those early years.
Yeah.
Like I've heard people say that even recently.
Yeah. There's a Chuck Berry song called Monkey Business that often gets referred to, I think, when people are trying to make that claim.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's something that this film faces head on, but I think still deals with pretty empathetically.
Yeah.
And it's, that's, part of what I like about the Woody Guthrie portrayal is that, it's not treated, even though the character is called fake. I mean, there's not a moment of watching that character where I identify him as a fake.
We don't really know this kid's background. Everything he was saying, I interpreted as this kid is in a tight spot and he has run away and he is on his own and he's making this shit up. I do not think his name is Woody Guthrie. I do not think his family's out in California. They get the call, the family that he's staying with gets a call from like a juvenile detention center.
Yeah.
Like, I like Woody Guthrie a lot as a character, but I totally understand the quote unquote fake archetype for him because I don't think we actually know anything about him.
See, and this all happens very early in the movie when I felt like I had to be open and for anything.
That's fair.
And so I was like, it wasn't registering for me in that moment.
It took me a little bit but he's like talking about his background and how
that's true.
He wrote all these songs for these musicians down in Nashville and he would have been a millionaire by now. And like this, one particular musician taught me the blues about 5 years ago and the kid's like 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, what I meant to say is maybe, okay, yeah, you can point out that he's fake, but I guess he didn't really strike me as insincere necessarily.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that fake has to be synonymous with insincere. I don't necessarily think that was the intention.
But, speaking of, talking about fakeness and insincerity. I mean, when we get into the Jude Quinn storyline, I mean, there is a point where, similarly to how Bob Dylan's real name is Robert Zimmerman, that Jude Quinn gets called out by a journalist for actually being named Aaron Jacob Adelstein. And, having grown up in Brookline, Massachusetts.
Yeah, rather privileged.
Yeah, the son of a department store owner. And, that gets more to like, the real kind of criticisms that would have been dealt towards Bob Dylan.
Against him,
yeah, in spite of the personas that he was taking on, the contradiction between that and his real upbringing.
I mean, I think we still see that a lot with celebrities, people kind of digging up their background and, criticizing people for maybe hiding a bit of this or just crafting a persona that maybe is contrary to how they grew up. But I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing.
It's only bad if
you're directly lying about it, that's one thing.
Well, if you're directly lying about it, and if you're trying to actively push that stuff aside, like if the image that you're crafting for the public is actively trying to kind of be like, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain type stuff. I hate to say this, but I think of Alec Baldwin's wife. I think is kind of an example, a real world example of something like that happening, where you go, okay, there's an image here that someone is trying to sell, and it's flying very much in the face of reality.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and I want to be really clear that I am not defending that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
But if we look at someone like Bob Dylan, who just because he chose to sing folk music, people made assumptions that he must have come from a low-income background. It's like, just because people are making assumptions that anybody that's like, kicking it in Greenwich Village in the 1960s had to have grown up like impoverished. Like
that's on them.
That's on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, even if that, is that creates their illusion of authenticity around a style, that there's something problematic about that too.
And that's something that we see happen all the time with the reporters.
Absolutely.
And I'm Not There, and also in Don't Look Back.
Right.
There is this thing where everyone is contending with, what is this genre supposed to look like? Is this person an accurate or deserving face for it? Right.
Yeah. I mean, when we get, still within the Jude Quinn storyline, one of the early scenes, and, Jude Quinn is the Cate Blanchett version of Bob Dylan, who keeps coming up against this reporter played by Bruce Greenwood, who at one point during a press conference asks Jude Quinn a question about, like, are you concerned that your music hasn't done enough for the cause for peace, I think? And then Jude compares like the phrase cause for peace to the phrase hunk of butter, and responds, I don't know how you can listen to anyone who wants you to believe he's dedicated to the hunk and not the butter.
Right. Yeah, I remember that line too.
Which is, not a direct quote from Don't Look Back, but is very much in the spirit.
Of it, of course.
Yeah. And an interesting note too, I mean, we've made the comparison between the footage from Don't Look Back and the Jude Quinn storyline, but Jude Quinn is meant to represent a later Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Not much later, but this is the electric Bob Dylan. This is post Newport Folk Bob Dylan. This is, not the pre Newport Folk Festival version we see in Don't Look Back. So there's a little bit, while there is verisimilitude, there is a barrier too.
Yeah. One thing that I really like, and at the beginning of that section, is when they're at I wrote down but can't find my note on what their version of the Newport Folk Festival was. It was like something like blues and jazz or folk and blues festival or whatever.
Not sure. Right now.
Regardless, when the music starts, it is mixed so loud. It absolutely puts you in that mindset. It is the loudest this film is, I think, through the entire film.
Yeah.
And I really like that detail. I think that that's very smart to put you in that mindset of, this is something very new to people in general, and particularly with this artist. This is a new sound to them, and it can feel kind of aggressive if you're not expecting it. And I like how, as people are being interviewed as they're walking out of this festival, a lot of people are criticizing it, but then one guy says, I kind of like getting blasted out of my skin.
Yeah, I love that too.
And then the next lady says, I think he's evil.
Yeah. And then the next one says, and we're his biggest fans, or something to that effect.
Yeah. It's also the great device at the beginning of that scene when Jude Quinn and his band, when they they have their backs to the audience and turn around, and initially they're shown with guns
blowing people away.
Yeah, before you actually see them with their instruments, but that's the effect of it.
Right. Yeah. Kudos to the sound design.
Yeah,
I agree. Quite nice touch.
So to put this film in the greater zeitgeist of how musicians are depicted in the modern day or close to it. So with the passage of time, we've seen the portrayal of real-life musicians and related figures, along with their influence in film. We've seen it go numerous directions. most more recent documentaries, and I'm thinking of films like the Amy Winehouse documentary Amy, or the Sparks Brothers, or Summer of Soul, they seem to have a more deliberate agenda than something like Don't Look Back. Not to mention that many of them quite literally look back into the past. They're not of the present or recent past in the way that Don't Look Back was. Alongside of that, there's also straightforward biopics, recent examples including things like Straight Outta Compton, Bohemian Rhapsody, Elvis, and more, which, whatever their level of quality or historical accuracy, mostly fit conventional Hollywood arcs. That I'm Not There belongs to a smaller group of films that I'm really personally quite into, of more formally inventive films about music and musicians. And these are films such as 24-Hour Party People, Across the Universe, Inside Llewyn Davis, Love and Mercy, and more, all of which understand, among other things, that we have more control over the mythology and interpretation of music history than we do of the history or the figures themselves. And, just thinking back to I'm Not There specifically in this context, do you think it's more fruitful to lean into myth or fiction versus fact in portraying real-world musicians in the present day?
I think these can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
I think I get a different kind of enjoyment from each of these genres.
Yeah.
And I don't know that one is greater than the other. I love Inside Llewyn Davis. I'm not going to say it's necessarily one of my favorite movies, but it's a movie I really do love. But I had a good time watching Elvis too. I don't think that one has to be inherently more fruitful or more deserving of a musician's story than the other.
Yeah. I think that what interests me about I'm Not There in the context of some of these other movies I mentioned is that I just struggle to think of other figures who still have yet to receive that treatment, whether they're older figures or even new people with the multiplicity of public personas in the vein of Bob Dylan or David Bowie.
I feel like that is it's so specific to Dylan.
I'd say that too.
Yeah, Todd Haynes said something on the WTF episode about Allen Ginsberg saying when he heard about this concept that Dylan was a cluster of archetypes. Mm-hmm. And you hear about how, he would meet somebody and he'd be one person, and then 6 months later somebody would run into him again and he'd be a completely different person. This is how he lived his life, and I think it's very unique. And I think that the Bowie comparison is a good one, but I can't think of many other people like that.
It's an interesting point.
Yeah, neither can I.
But even when, to mention another film that I just referenced, Love and Mercy, which is a pretty straightforward telling of 2 episodes of Brian Wilson's life.
Yeah, I like that movie a lot.
It's a great movie, but it's 2 specific tellings, and it's got 2 different actors portraying Brian Wilson at these different times, and people who don't look particularly alike at that, Paul Dano and John Cusack. I like how that movie, it specifies its focus. It doesn't aim to be all things Brian Wilson, but it also has an interesting amount of variety that kind of lends itself to the different ways he can be perceived over time too.
Yeah.
So I think that, I appreciate that approach in a similar way to I'm Not There, even though the subjects are very different. Just along with what you said, I had a great time watching Elvis too, and I'm all there for that kind of movie. But I just feel like over time, there, we see more of an emphasis towards more straightforward tellings of these stories. There's definitely a move over time from what you see in Don't Look Back to what you see in a movie like Elvis, where, even as fun as it is something that looks back. And I feel like a lot of the stories we get now are of people who have already made their names a long time ago. And I wonder if there's anyone, in the present, or if there's a way to display such a figure in the present that, however cagey or not cagey the person is, if there's something that could be parallel to Don't Look Back today.
I have one person that jumped out to me right away in watching Don't Look Back, and that is Tom York of Radiohead.
Yeah, totally.
Sure. Yeah.
And I didn't take any notes on this, but in my time reading about comments that he's put out in the media, and I think ways that he has a love-hate relationship with the cult of personality that is Tom York.
Yeah. He's very enigmatic.
Very enigmatic, but it also seems like he has some fun with the idea that he can be a prick.
Yeah.
And Your mileage may vary on that decision, I guess.
Your patience.
Your patience, or your threshold for hearing or kind of receiving that. But I would be really interested in an I'm Not There style approach to something like the music of Radiohead and New York.
I mean, I'd love that.
Yeah, I would too. I mean,
sounds great.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that we're entering a time where a lot of people, myself included, are getting some biopic fatigue.
Yeah.
I didn't see Bohemian Rhapsody. I didn't see Rocket Man. I didn't see the Amy Winehouse one that came out a couple months ago, Back to Black. I watched the trailer to that and I was like, this looks bad. And I'm sorry if it's good. I didn't see it. The trailer made it look bad. And
the box office receipts, I think, also reflected that.
It was
too.
very heavily advertised here in New York, and I was very glad when it came and went. Even though my point earlier that I stand by is that these can coexist, I am much more interested in new things coming out that take some more risks with these stories.
Right.
Yeah. I was just going to mention, too, I feel like there's a parallel track of music films. Like I'm thinking of something like Yesterday and like Blinded by the Light as being these fiction films that almost treat music like IP as this way of kind of engaging with it and letting the music itself do some of the emotional heavy lifting in the films. You were mentioning a little bit about, biopic fatigue. And I feel like that is another lane that these movies are also kind of trying to fill is maybe a response to that. Yeah. Like, here's a way for you to have a great time in a movie theater and listen to 25 Beatles songs that you love.
Well, speaking of Beatles songs, I mean, another movie I mentioned a few minutes ago was Across the Universe.
Yes.
Which I thought of while watching I'm Not There because it was released very close in time to it.
Yeah. I actually haven't seen it, but maybe you can tell me a little more. I feel like there is a little bit of a similar DNA from the idea of like many different stories, refractive, kind of kaleidoscopic in its scope.
Right. Yeah, which is a good way to put it. And that movie, I mean, it's, Beatles songs are woven through it. It's a musical, but the Beatles themselves do not appear and they're not mentioned in the movie. Yeah. But a bunch of characters from their songs, people like Mr. Kite and Dr. Robert, they appear as characters in the movie.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And even though, I mean, people who would put it down might argue it's a jukebox musical, but I think it's a really compelling movie to watch for, how kaleidoscopic it is. And that's proof that you can like take this tried and true IP that, at that time had existed for more than 40 years and still do something really creative with it. Like, I think if I watched that movie today, I would not feel fatigued by it because it's just an inventive vision of what to do with that music. It's not trying to cut through to this illusion of authenticity that some of these other biopics try to do. Or, it's not like doing the Yesterday thing. It's not treating it as something as we kind of take for granted. It's just, whatever, your level of familiarity with the music or whatever, however much you appreciate it, it's just doing something really interesting with it.
Yeah. Do we want to shout out any little details that we liked about this movie?
So I wouldn't consider these little details, but I want to just briefly mention a few of the performances we didn't talk about in I'm Not There Yet. And number one on that list is Charlotte Gainsbourg as Claire, wife of Robbie Clark.
I have her in all caps here.
Who is who gives an amazing performance. And she was the only person that ahead of the movie being cast that Todd Haynes specifically had in mind. And, she's like a composite character of Suze Rose Hello and Sarah Dillon, which I immediately picked up on while watching the movie. And I liked that. They had someone there to represent Sarah Dillon. I have more familiarity of those two partners with Sarah Dillon, with her story. But part of why I like that perspective is to really have someone who is an external viewpoint on Bob Dylan, but someone who's still a very prominent figure on his life and had a consequential impact on, his own. I don't know about change in persona, but the arc of his own life too.
Yeah. I also love the intertextuality of Charlotte Gainsbourg.
Yeah,
being the daughter of a very famous musician and an actress, which I think gives her a unique perspective on being at the intersection of personal life, public persona, and family.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Also want to shout out David Cross playing Allen Ginsberg.
He's so good, and he's so convincing. Julian, I mentioned this to you off mic that I watched this film first and then watched Don't Look Back, because I wanted something fun on Saturday night and thought this movie would be more fun, which I do still stand by. But then when I put on Don't Look Back and Allen Ginsberg is in the very beginning of that film, I'm like, they look exactly the same.
Yeah, it's
they nailed
uncanny.
it.
I really like the distant Beatles cameo in this
love it.
during the Kate Blanchett
Very
section.
funny.
Because I like how at first he's just sort of like chatting with them off in the distance, but then they start getting chased by like Beatlemania fans.
Yeah, very, very Hard Day's Night all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that too. It was a really nice touch. There are two things. I'm going to just stay on the Charlotte Gainsbourg train for a moment here. So two things that jumped out for me. The way that Todd Haynes shot those house scenes of her, all those slow zooms, subjects way off in the distance.
Yeah.
Very safe.
Very safe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Very, very safe right there.
Yeah, well, another moment when I thought of safe is when you see Jack Rollins go into his preacher persona later on.
Yeah.
I was immediately thinking of Renwood there.
Absolutely, yes. And by the way...
And he's in that, the guy from
Peter Friedman.
Renwood. Yeah,
There
Peter
you go,
Friedman.
yes.
He also appears in the Christian Bale documentary.
Yeah.
As does Julianne Moore.
Yes.
I know.
As the Joan Baez stand-in.
A lot of connections here, yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing I just wanted to say is that there's a scene where Claire, Charlotte Gainsbourg's character, she's talking to her daughters while they eat, and then she collects their plate, and she's like, guys, you didn't eat a thing, and then proceeds to dump it all down the drain. As the father of a 4-year-old, I can absolutely relate. This is what your life is like. You're just like,
sometimes it'd be like that.
Will you eat anything that we prepare for you? For God's sake. So just that little detail hit me on a personal note.
Yeah. And to say just a tiny bit more about real-world music connections in the film, you also have Richie Havens appearing as Old Man Arvin during one of the early scenes with Woody Guthrie, and Chris Christopherson as the narrator.
Yeah.
Which admittedly, that went over my head until the credits.
Yeah. I love Richie Havens. I would listen to that guy sing the phone book.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a wonderful singer.
Totally. Did you guys catch the one non-Bob Dylan song that is in this movie?
I think I did. Remind me, what was that?
It is a Monkees song, which is Stepping Stone. And it plays in the Kate Blanchett section when they're at some sort of kind
club.
of publicity party or club
party,
or something.
Yeah.
And I mean, the lyrics to that, they're pretty straightforward, but
definitely.
It's very much like, do not use me to get ahead. Like,
right.
I'm not your stepping stone. And I think that, that is very much something that Bob Dylan was feeling throughout much of his life, and particularly early career in this time that Kate Blanchett's character is representing.
Yeah.
So we were also talking about like real life musician connections, and Dougie noticed that during the funeral scene, the singer is the singer from My Morning Jacket.
Oh yes,
Jim
James.
Yeah, which I never would have picked up on just by visual, but Dougie did catch that.
Yeah, his face is all painted up.
I actually did catch that while watching too.
His voice is very distinct.
Yeah.
One thing though that I missed while really listening to the film is that we should mention too that I'm Not There has a great soundtrack album that has a lot of music that's not featured in the actual film.
Yeah, a lot of like covers.
Yeah, some great stuff in there. But there's, there are some songs that do make it into the film, including some like covers of Ballad of a Thin Man sung by Stephen Malkmus from Pavement. And I have to admit, his voice went over my head when watching the movie. I mean, because Kate Blanchett's singing, I assumed it was her, but she appears to be singing, but I would think I'd recognize his voice, but it missed me.
Yeah, I was wondering how they did her vocals throughout this, because I'm listening and I was like, this is not within her range. I feel very, very strongly about that.
Yeah. But Stephen Malkmus is an interesting choice for someone to sing Dylan songs too, because, he has kind of like, a rough and casual singing voice too.
Yeah.
And though he doesn't sound exactly like Bob Dylan, it's a similar spirit for sure.
Yeah.
And on like the exact flip side, the song in one of the songs in the credits, which is a cover of Knockin' on Heaven's Door by the musician Anthony, who has a very like ethereal kind of voice.
Yeah.
And I think is the exact polar opposite of Bob Dylan's vocal styling.
Yeah.
But also good energy for the lyrics. So
I think works well for the wind down in the credits.
Absolutely.
Nice. Yeah. I just wanted to mention some very quick visual points of comparison, I think, between Don't Look Back and I'm Not There. And if there are any that pop up for you guys, please let me know. I loved that in the Kate Blanchett's kind of Dylan stand-in, Jude Quinn. Thank you. Gosh, there are visuals of her with fat stacks of Life magazines, which I felt was a direct callback to Dylan's animosity towards magazines and the Time magazine reference in Don't Look Back, which I thought was kind of hilarious.
Because Dylan does in Don't Look Back say like he reads Time magazine on the airplane. Yeah. But if he actually wants any sort of like journalism or whatever, that's not where he goes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then I felt like there was also the interview that the Keenan Jones character does in the car in I'm Not There with Jude Quinn. Again, direct parallel to Dylan's actual interview with the Time interviewer, Horace Freeland Judson, when he literally asks, would you ask the Beatles that? And then he also says, like, I don't expect an answer from you. And I know more about you than you know about me. They're like three direct quotes in I'm Not There to Don't Look Back.
Yeah, also a bunch of moments in I'm Not There where like Bob Dylan songs are just name dropped as lines, like Just Like a Woman or things like that.
Right, yeah.
Are we ready for Unlikely Shared Universe?
Oh, I think we are. I can start.
Sure.
So we see that Jack Rollins starts his career as a bright, shining star in the folk scene of the early 1960s, but I'm wondering if his heart is truly in it, honestly, because we see that although he's really tapped into something his generation responds to, he is volatile, he's unpredictable, and ultimately in his final turn that we see in the movie, a born-again Christian pastor, Father John, and it seems like he's swayed by whatever seems to give him peace or maybe money. I'm wondering if this move in particular is a grift. What if he's actually a con man? And as soon as he starts this church, as soon as he starts it, he abandons it and heads, to the East Coast this time with his lady friend Sydney in tow to find a new score. And he drops this Jack Rollins, Father John moniker for something more Jewish, Irving Rosenfeld. And he gets into loan scamming people out of large sums of money. It's at this time that he gets railroaded by a comically 70s Italian FBI agent who he asks him to help him pull off some bigger arrests. But neither of these guys on opposite sides of the law really know what they're getting into. Do we know what this is?
Not going to lie, I'm not getting it.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
American Hustle?
Oh,
any takers?
Okay, yes, I have watched this movie.
Have not seen that
movie.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into this soon, but I think I have a deep suspicion that the one that I was going to do is the one that you're going to do, Julian. Yeah. And what kept me from doing it was very noticeable gaps in time. And I'm curious to see how you might do this. But this one lines up really well.
Okay.
In terms of timeline. Quite good. And got to say, Irving Rosenfeld has got a real thing for music.
Okay. Interesting point.
So maybe some of that didn't totally leave him. Just saying.
Nice. All right. Well, since you've set up
mine.
I
think yours have been teased now.
Mine has been teased. All right. So I shall share. So Billy McCarty, who we see in I'm Not There. So maybe, there is something real about this persona, but this is not a persona of Bob Dylan. This is the self-idealization of a man who is still named Bill, but, is not a 1960s folk singer, but rather a farm worker in Texas in 1916. This is the self-idealization, and perhaps, this image is most vivid in his moments when life starts to leave him. And, he just lives all of his life, maybe not exactly living up to, but imagining himself as Billy the Kid, believing that he can achieve this outlaw status for himself and that there's something glorious about it. And whatever path he lives by, that's just there the whole time. And maybe he only comes anywhere close to achieving this image as he is exiting or perhaps entering his days of heaven.
Yes.
Were you right about it?
I'm 100% right about
Yeah.
it. I like how you turned it into like a mental dreamlike projection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so much of what we see in I'm Not There is kind of that.
There we go.
Particularly in that section, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said it, but yes, this is Richard Gere's character, Bill, in Days of Heaven.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this one time where the name carries over.
It definitely
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
I know. I was this close, man. I couldn't get over the time thing, but you did it in a very graceful way.
Well, thank you.
All right. Great job, guys. So I have a quick one. In the Jude Quinn, Kate Blanchett section of I'm Not There, we briefly encounter Jude's former lover, Coco Rivington, played by Michelle Williams. The inspiration for this character seems to be Edie Sedgwick, one of Andy Warhol superstars. But what if it wasn't? What if Coco was gaining fame and success through her career as a dancer and actress on Broadway? And as a Broadway performer, she is just taking a quick jaunt around England, maybe catching some West End shows before heading back to the US to star in the original Broadway production of Sweet Charity, directed and choreographed by her husband, Bob Fosse. His extramarital affairs put quite the strain on their relationship in real life, which may have caused her to step out herself and pursue other relationships with Bob Dylan or the other men she is connected with in this film. But I think it's totally possible that she is using this moniker of Coco Rivington, but her real name is Gwen Verdon.
You know, I haven't seen that series, but after a certain point, I saw exactly where you were going with
Thank
that.
you.
Yes.
I also have not seen the series, but I've seen enough Bob Fosse movies and know enough about Gwen Verdon that I felt like I could make this work.
Yeah.
I think you did.
I was picking up on it, but that's great. I love it. Man, guys, we did it.
We did
We
it.
did it.
Are there
Yeah.
any final thoughts about any of these movies that we want to share?
I think, you know, there's a lot out there to attempt to portray Bob Dylan. Of those many films, these two are certainly still going to stand out as favorites for me. I still have to see some of them, but I think that, you know, from both D.A. Pennebaker in 1967 and Todd Haynes in 2007, we get some really fascinating visions of Bob Dylan that I will happily revisit at many points in the future.
Cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just want to say that I think that Todd Haynes is quickly becoming one of my favorite filmmakers. This is his third film that we have covered. We've got to do Carol. You haven't seen Carol.
I haven't seen it, no.
We've
Yeah.
got to do Carol.
Got to do that.
But I just feel like I'm at a point where I need to catch up on any missing Todd Haynes films because I was totally into this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so far he's like batting, 1,000 for me.
Yeah. Have
Yeah.
you seen Velvet Goldmine?
I've not yet.
I
Neither
haven't
have I.
either. And I felt like,
Mise en scene.
yeah, I mean, maybe so.
Yeah.
Maybe so. Yeah. Maybe we'll do Carol for the holidays.
I was thinking that.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a good
Awesome.
point.
Just
Good,
planting
good.
that seed now.
All right. No, I'm down for that. I got to admit, revisiting Don't Look Back was very cool. I feel like it really feels particularly interesting to see somebody who's that famous at such a vulnerable stage of their career. Just really, really cool. And I think to your point, I think Todd Haynes is awesome.
He's so
Yeah.
cool.
He's so cool. And I'm still processing my thoughts on this movie, but I just thought it was a hell of a ride.
Absolutely.
It was so cool, and I'm excited to see it again, maybe in the next year or two, and really come with some thoughts. I feel like was a little half baked, but I was really happy to be in the presence of you guys talking about it. So this is really cool.
Likewise.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you can follow us at Sleepless Cinematic Pod on TikTok and Instagram. You can email us at sleeplesscinematicpod@gmail.com. You can follow me on Letterboxd at Patroness of Cats.
And you can follow me on Letterboxd at my name, Julian_Barthold.
Do we need to talk about what we're doing next?
Oh, yes, we absolutely should.
Let's do it.
We are coming to the close of the cycle of our conversations about musicians on film. And for our close-up segment this cycle, we are going to talk about a very interesting musical figure of some prominent films, and that would be the late, great Adam Schlesinger.
Yeah.
Songwriter, composer, performer, who was known for being a member of the band Fountains of Wayne, but also composed the songs for some very memorable films.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to do That Thing You Do, which is probably the one that put him on the map.
That will be a thing we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to do Josie and the Pussycats.
Yes.
I was Josie last year for Halloween.
Yeah.
Got to throw that out there.
And we'll round it out with the very aptly named music and lyrics.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's only fitting that we end this cycle by doing our close-up about a musician in film.
Yes. And a musician who made songs for musicians on film.
Absolutely.
yes.
I think that's the really
Meta.
important distinction. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm excited for that.
Well, that will be where we go next. Oh, mama, can this really be the end?
I think it is. And we finally got an impersonation.
Hey, you got it in the Midnight Cowboy episode too, just saying.
Okay. I got it.
Everybody's talking at me.
All right.
There it is again.
All right. Good night.
Good night.